Important question.
Here's your coffee, sir.
Gremlins was a great success upon its release, and the studio was stunned by the movie because they didn't get the concept before the film came out. They marketed it so poorly, and yet it raked in money without trying. It was the fourth highest grossing film of the year behind Ghostbusters, Beverly Hills Cop, and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Seeing dollar signs, Warner Brothers approached Joe Dante 1 week after the film premiered. Dante considered it and conferred with producer Mike Fennell about the idea. Almost immediately after the first one, Warner Brothers wanted to do a sequel, and Joe and I worked with a series of writers trying to come up with something, and nothing clicked. And this went on for a while, and we finally just gave up. Just nothing was working. In the end, Dante would walk away. I really couldn't chase the idea of spending another half a year or a year with puppets. I just didn't have it in me, so I said thanks but no thanks. With no Dante, Warner Brothers tried their best to make a sequel to a concept they never understood during production or after release. They hired a lot of writers and came up with some concepts, but none turned out very good. One of them was Gremlins taking Las Vegas, but when Warner Brothers heard how much it would cost from their bean counters, the studio quickly backed away from that idea. Another was to have Gremlins on Mars. Then one day in 1989, Joe went to the commissary on the Warner Brothers lot and was stopped by the head of the studio. "Look, we need Gremlins 2. We have to have Gremlins 2. You could do anything you want. I don't care about the script. I don't care about the story. It just has to be called Gremlins 2 and have Gremlins in it. Anything else is your call." One of the reasons the studio needed Gremlins 2 was because they were worried about the summer of 1990. In 1989, Warner knew they would rule the box office with Batman, but they had no big tentpole film to go up against the many sequels announced for the summer of 1990, as well as Disney's Dick Tracy, which the studio feared most of all. They were sure Tracy would storm the box office, and they wanted Gremlins 2 to be released on the same day to damage that film's box office take. So, Warner Brothers gave Dante full creative control for Part 2. He was given a $50 million budget to make the film, which was a lot more than the $11 million he had for the first one. With all this in place, Dante decided that the second Gremlins film was going to be an anti-sequel by making the movie into one big joke. His idea was to make a movie about why there shouldn't be a sequel to Gremlins 2. We decided to make fun of the whole concept of Gremlins. Let's let them know it's a sequel and that we know it's a sequel. We were going to make fun of the movie and the fact that you came to see it. Dante intended to put some personal memories from the first film into this movie to spoof the release of Gremlins. One was that kids often bothered Dante with questions about the rules, and he wanted to mock them in the sequel somehow. Another one was to depict an angry mother that complained to him that Gremlins was too violent. Somehow, some way, he was going to represent these moments in the film. Mike Fennell and Joe Dante then began looking for a writer. The first Gremlins writer, Chris Columbus, was now a busy director, so using him wouldn't work. During a screening of a film, Dante talked with his buddy Jonathan Kaplan about his current predicament, and Kaplan would later call Dante and say, "Look, there's this guy, this writer, Charlie Haas. He's really terrific. He's very terrific and very imaginative. You should talk to him." Dante asked Jonathan to give him a call, and they would check him out. So Kaplan called Charlie and said, "How would you like to write Gremlins 2? To which Haas responded, "Yeah, sure, that sounds like fun." Dante Dante just couldn't come to terms why a sequel for this film needed to be made, and he definitely wanted to raise the stakes. He didn't want it to take place in Kingston Falls, and they wanted it to be in a bigger area, but worried about budget costs if they had to close down streets and subways. Dante specifically wanted to modernize the movie since the first one was reminiscent of old-style cinema. Haas began working on concepts and came up with ideas of putting the movie in a confined building. The idea that came to me in response to that criteria was to do it in the smart office building so that you could have a lot of stuff go wrong and make fun of that technology, which was sort of a buzzword at the time, the smart building and the smart everything else. And I remember going to a presentation, I think over in Alameda, by a company that outfitted smart buildings. And they showed me a bunch of the stuff, and I thought it was potentially very funny. After hearing this idea, Dante and Fennell knew they found their writer. The three began working in Dante's back office, writing up concepts on cards and ordering them on a board. When it came to doing effects, Chris Wallace was contacted by Dante. At the time, he was busy directing The Fly 2 and was going to be the effects designer for Amblin's Arachnophobia, so they couldn't use him. They wanted someone experienced, so they called Rick Baker, who didn't seem interested in the job because he didn't want to remake someone else's effects. So Dante decided to allow Baker to come up with his own ideas. They turned the Gremlins into different kind of Gremlins, so all the designs and ideas that Rick had, we could come up with, and we could make different kinds of gremlins out of them. And plus he changed the designs of Gizmo and regular gremlins a little bit. To cater to Rick's ideas for different gremlins, the idea for the Splice of Life lab came to being. They needed to explain the idea of a flying gremlin, a spider gremlin, an elephant gremlin, and so many others, and genetic engineering seemed the right fit. In the early stages, the electric gremlin was very close to being cut during development, but it soon became central because the other endings for the film were just not working out. One was to have cement poured into the building to kill all the gremlins, but that would blast the budget. Then the idea was to use the electric gremlin to kill the others somehow. It was Charlie's idea to trap the gremlin in a phone so it could be released at the end of the film. It took weeks for the three to come up with a suitable ending to deal with the gremlin infestation. Another idea that didn't make it into the film was Steven Spielberg's request to have a Sergeant Rock-like character who they hoped would be played by Charles Napier, who would help fight the gremlins. This idea was scrapped because they thought it would take away too much screen time from Billy and Kate. In early concepts, the villain of the film was supposed to be a vain and wealthy real estate developer with a Manhattan manor. This character was supposed to be a melding of Donald Trump and Ted Turner. There are specific nods that confirm this in the film. The first was Clamp's obsession with colorizing black and white films, and the other was the autobiography very similar to Trump's, as well as several other nods. At the time, Trump was overbearing and obviously kind of goofy. He was an emblem of what was going on in the 80s and 90s with greed and money and crassness, and the whole world being for sale. But he still seemed sort of harmless. Then Glover took over the role. He was so likable and boyish, and gee whiz, he started to become sympathetic. The first 3 days of shooting began on Memorial Day weekend in New York during 1989. The cast and crew would film in New York for 3 days, and the rest of the film would be on sets used for the Peltzer apartment and the Clamp Center. The interior of the building was a gigantic set, and it cost about $6 to $8 million, with working elevators and stores that were stocked with merchandise and priced. Anyone on the production could actually buy from within these stores if they wanted. The idea was that during any time, any camera angle could be used and you could see activity in all the stores. The first set used in the studio was the Peltzer home. Just after the 3 days in New York, the apartment scenes were done before going to the Clamp Center set. Unlike the first Gremlins film, most of the creature work would be done done after principal photography wrapped with the actors. Dante didn't want to go through the same thing he did with the first film, so he figured if he did all the actor work first, he could then spend 6 scheduled weeks with puppet work. In many of the scenes with the actors, like when Clamp is dealing with the gremlin, the actors actually used a hand puppet for the creatures and did movements to simulate gremlin attack while one of their arms was fake. The intricate puppet work would be done after the actors would part, with some callbacks if needed. When Christopher Lee arrived on the set, the first thing he did was apologize to Joe Dante for being in the cheesy Howling 2. Dante totally forgot he was in the sequel to his first Howling. Lee wanted to have long hair and a mustache while playing his role wacky, and Dante took the actor to the lab and showed him around, stating that he needed Lee to play the role straight so he could make the jokes he had planned to work. Lee quickly understood and adapted accordingly. The shoot was very calm, as Dante had complete freedom and worked with most of the cast and crew before. It was fun, and by the end of the shoot, Warner Brothers asked producer Steven Spielberg to help get Dante to cut the movie down some. Diplomatically, Steven did this while working with Dante. Before the cuts began, Dante was allowed to have his own cut for his personal library, and he would show it to friends. After letting a few see it, he realized it was too long, and the first act of the film moved way too slow, so it was easier to cut things when Spielberg arrived in the editing room. When the studio head saw the film, Dante stated they most likely liked it less than the first one.
I can't say they were any more enamored of the sequel than they were of the original, and in fact, I think that they probably disliked it even more. It was not a popular film among the producers. I should go up the ladder. Were not pleased.
Despite the studio reservations, the standard merchandise for the film was released. Although there was enthusiasm for the merchandise, it was not as prevalent as the first film. There was the standard novel, soundtrack, t-shirts, a Gizmo 11-inch soft plush doll. There was a Gizmo to the Rescue book in the United Kingdom, and a few others that came out months late. For Nintendo and Game Boy, the Gremlins 2 game was released. In this game, Gizmo is in a tower of death with floors that are lethal and boss gremlins to face. Applause Toys would release several PVC 2-inch figures in various poses. They were pretty much statues, but some have value today. Topps released an 88 card set with 11 stickers. There was also a factory set with 88 cards and 22 exclusive behind-the-scenes cards. The wax packs were overproduced like most movie cards of that time, and as a result, the value of these cards haven't grown much over time. Unlike the first film's merchandising bonanza, audiences were not galvanized to see this film. Gremlins 2, the new batch, came out during a competitive season of awesome films. Before its release, Total Recall and Another 48 Hours were ruling the box office. Yet everyone predicted Dick Tracy would take the day, and unfortunately, Gremlins 2 did not win out over that movie. When Gremlins 2 arrived at the theaters during its first week, it did a disappointing $14.3 million and ranked 4th behind Total Recall, Another 48 Hours, and the movie Warner Brothers feared the most, Dick Tracy, which got the number 1 spot. During the second week of its release, Gremlins moved to the number 5 spot as RoboCop 2 bumped it out of 4th place, while Betsy's Wedding got the number 6 spot. Yet again, on its third week of release, Gremlins fell to the 7th spot, making room for both Ghost Dad and Tom Cruise's Race Car Fest Days of Thunder. From there, Gremlins just dropped. When Die Hard 2 came out, it dropped to the 9th spot. The film's final death came on its 5th week, when Gremlins Free fell to the 16th spot, making it a whisper at the box office. Audience reactions to the film were mixed. Those who didn't like it stated it lacked the Spielberg-esque sentimentality of the first film and was nothing but a slapstick mess. The movie ended up being a bomb at the box office that did not make its budget back. We didn't make as much money as we could have, and it put the kibosh on plans for an animated Gremlins series, which they already had in the works. Upon the release of Gremlins 2, I was a happy biscuit working at the Carmike cinemas just outside of Fort McClellan, Alabama, as an usher or concessionist. I was still in high school, and I remember this job being one of my favorite in my life before a manager with a family of thieves took over the place and pretty much killed the quality atmosphere. But before the death of that theater, I was living the dream, watching Back to the Future 3, Total Recall, and every single movie that came out. I never missed one for years. Gremlins 2 took me by surprise. It was different than the first one, but it was also exhilarating because there was no restraint to this movie, and I looked at it basically as a Looney Tunes cartoon. I see it pretty much the same way today. There are fans out there that state the sequel is better than the first one, but I don't really subscribe to that take. I look at the two films as interchangeable based on the mood you're in. If you're in a serious mood, Gremlins 1 is far better, and if you're in a batshizz crazy mood, then Gremlins 2 is the choice to watch. At least in 1990, when ticket buyers asked me what I thought of the movie, that is how I described it back then. The movie starts with a Looney Tunes skit, and it makes the tone clear for this sequel. Being a lifelong fan of Looney Tunes and including Chuck Jones as a cameo in Gremlins, Dante wanted to include the cartoons further in Gremlins 2. Chuck Jones came out of retirement to pen these moments. The cartoon introduction in the film was much longer initially. The segment debated on what to call the new Gremlins installment, but during test screenings, viewers were impatient and thought it was too long, so it was cut from the film. The opening shot is from Superman 4 stock footage, which is pretty well known to detail buffs of this movie. Mr. Frank Forster was the creation of Robert Picardo. He asked Dante to wear the fanciest suits and to play him as a control freak who only wants perfection. Here is Picardo's take on the character.
So I had this idea that I wanted to be incredibly put together. I wanted Armani clothes. I wanted gorgeous shoes. If you started on my expensive shoes stepping over a puddle, it would immediately set up my character's disdain for anything that wasn't perfect. My shoe is perfect. My suit is perfect. My hair is perfect. My limousine is perfect. And I have to step out into this crappy neighborhood to do my boss's bidding. And part of that incredibly put together aspect of my character was I said to Joe, I really want to ooze contempt and disdain for all of the underlings in the building by never learning any of their names.
The old man, Key Luke, would die in January 1991, just 7 months after the film released. His last movie would be Woody Allen's Alice. In Gremlins 2, Gizmo wears an armband in memory of his owner. Ironically, there was to be a scene where there was a funeral for the character of Mr. Wing, but it was axed for time reasons. I always wondered why Mr. Wing's shop was demolished, because I would have thought for sure he would have given it to the young boy from the first film. However, he must have harbored some sore feelings for that boy selling Gizmo in the first film. At least that's my assumption. Despite this, the book tried to address this by having two Clamp reporters wondering if they were going to auction the old man's shop. But one explains that bulldozers had been sitting there waiting for Mr. Wing to die for some time. The scene with Gizmo walking was my most difficult moment to suspend disbelief for this film. I know the movie is slapstick, and I have zero problems with that. Yet I do have a problem with this scene because Gizmo is walking in bright light and at worst, sunlight, and he is not affected in any way. This totally takes me out of the movie every time I see it. They should have had the scene take place with severe overcast or during the evening When Billy and Kate walk to the Clamp Center, like the first movie, there is a gag showing what is playing at the theater. It says the Howling 11 is playing. Yet if you look not far from it, you will see a poster for Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing hanging near the theater, dating the movie, which is fine with me. The book tries to explain some reasons why Billy and Kate are in New York. Kate wants to be a book editor, and on the 13th floor of the Clamp Center there is a publication firm, and so she works there to get in the door. She helped Billy get a job there when there was an opening that required an architect. The Clamp Center was a building on 40th and Park. It still stands today, just without the sign. The tour guide you see when they enter the building is Paige Hanna, sister of Daryl Hanna. In her hand is Clamp's book, I Took Manhattan, which is very similar on purpose to Donald Trump's novel, The Art of the Deal. When Kate talks to Billy about getting recognized and then she kisses him goodbye, there was a deleted scene where Forster walks by with a tolerant look. Then he speaks to Mr. Clamp on the screen while Fred interrupts him.
Excuse me, Mr. Clamp.
We're
Could
busy.
I speak with you for a minute?
And tomorrow-
Yes, but I only want to speak with him for a minute.
I
just
said we're busy.
Yes, but Yes, Mr. Forster.
Besides this film, Haviland Morris is best remembered for her role from 16 Candles. Her character, Marla Singer, is consumed by a corporate mentality, and it seems to be the backbone of many characters in this film. A really fun deleted scene would have had Marla and Billy in the elevator while it had difficulties. The elevator gets really confused, and it's kind of a funny scene.
Your request is floor 32.
No, not 32. I want
don't say that.
Well, I have to get up to
You
58.
have canceled floor 32. Please state your new desired floor number.
46.
58.
Smoking is antisocial.
I hate this thing.
Now, an interesting way to view this movie is to realize that beyond Kate, Billy, and the Futtermans, every character is consumed by a corporate mentality. Although Clamp seems to grow in the film, even at the end he is consumed by merchandising, public relations, and projects. Most characters in this movie have personalities that reflect their jobs rather than themselves. And as long as everything goes the way it should, they're fine. Even the customers in the movie are corporatized, worrying about little things. Fred wants to cover the mayhem and advance as a journalist. Marla wants to use Billy to advance. The janitor complains about the corporate situation. The guard doesn't listen, even though a strange creature just attacked him, and he follows procedure instead of dealing with that situation. I can go on, but you get the idea. Their reactions are more how the situations will cause lawsuits and losses rather than lives. They think less for survival and more procedural. Their mindsets are different than the average person, and as such, this makes Billy, Kate, and the Futtermans more relatable. The downside to this is that there is less sympathy for many of the characters in the movie. When Picardo finds Billy's Kingston Falls picture, he is absolutely livid with it, being in his controlled building, and his disdain for Billy is immediate, per Robert Picardo.
Zach's character is from the Midwest of the United States that my character would never have visited and probably had complete contempt for. So when Peltzer has this cute little drawing of his sweet little hometown that does not fit into the approved art in my building where I control every detail, then he immediately is at odds with me.
I love the little moment where Marla elbows Billy when he's about to speak, and it should be known that it was Robert Picardo who came up with the idea to use barcodes for all employees in the building because Forster refused to remember their names.
All of America knew what barcode technology was from the supermarket at that point. I said, could I have a little sort of device? It was a barcode scanner, and everyone who works in the building has a barcode, no name tag. And I scan them, and I read their name off of the little machine. And Joe, for God bless him, when he said yes to that, however many thousands of dollars were spent on that device, on making all the barcodes, he was so he was really gracious to me. He took that idea and said yes on the spot.
Now, one of the deleted scenes that I would have enjoyed in this film was when Forster was in his office and he is listening to subliminal messages in the building to control folks inside. One talks about not stealing office supplies, while the other suggests that Daniel Clamp would be a great president, which is downright eerie considering this movie was made in 1990 and the Clamp character was based majorly on Donald Trump.
Since I've started working right through lunch, people tell me I look years younger. Oh, and I've lost those 10 pounds, too.
I've been thinking Mr. Clamp would make a great president. And not stealing office supplies works for me.
It's for you, sir.
This deleted scene would continue when Clamp would contact Forster and tell him that he's buying the state of Vermont and that the revolving door downstairs is having issues.
That's great news, sir.
Oh, no kidding. How many guys do you know that own their own state? Hey, did I show you a picture of those mountains?
Yes, sir. Tall.
Yeah, while I'm in there, get that revolving door fixed downstairs. It shorted out last night when I had some money people here. Mrs. Tanaka's still spinning.
Yes, sir. I'll take...
This scene would then continue on when Forster catches the employee going on an unauthorized break. It is great to see Dr. Klopek return from the burbs. I mean, the actor Henry Gibson, who plays a Clamp employee. He is a clear victim of the corporatized environment, but perhaps that's for the best, because it's better he not be in this building in 24 hours. Grandpa Fred believes his TV persona is Dracula's cousin from Iowa. The actor is a failed man dressed like a ghoul or vampire, and yet his dream is to become a journalist. A place called the Institute for Gremlins 2 Studies suggests that Fred seems to be standing up for journalistic ethics by broadcasting the truth to the world. However, one could also say he's vampiric, sustaining his own career off the bloodshed that he is voyeuristically showing the audience. And I only mention this to be thorough with the many point of views out there, but for this film, I can't take it that seriously or deep, especially when Dante himself states that Fred was just
playing a character modeled on Al Lewis, who was Grandpa Munster.
So since Fred is based on Al Lewis from the Munsters, and we have Gomez visiting this movie as well, I have a hard time seeing Fred in terms of a serious theory, rather than a homage to previous media, which Dante often does in all of his films. In the end, I say believe what you will, as we are no arbiters of how to watch a film, nor is anyone else deserving of such an ability. Now on Fred's screen is a tease to Rick Baker. His first special effects job was on a movie called Octoman from 1971, and it looks terrible. Baker got better though. And who is directing Fred in the studio? Why, it's Joe Dante himself, of course. Yes, that's the director of Gremlins 2, directing this B-movie studio. Some of the shops seen in this film was Mr. Donut with all cop clientele. There is a U-Haul store on the second floor, which is kind of silly. Next to it is something called Camp Beverly Hills. Is Achwell Foley in there?
Axel Foley. Axel. Achwell. Axel.
There is a tattoo shop, a fur coat shop, and a Spencer Gifts later in the film. In the novel, as Billy and Fred are walking, they are heading to a McClamp King burger stand. As they talked, Billy would mention Kingston Falls, while Fred mentioned the Splice of Life labs on the upper floors, which made it into the film. As Fred is walking, there's a funny moment where an old lady walks by and a little girl looks up to Fred like he's a freak. His reaction is pretty straightforward. The delivery man who gets Gizmo's tune stuck in his head is none other than Raymond Cruz, who played DeStefano from our previously covered Alien Resurrection videos. Cruz has been in a ton of other stuff as well, like Clear and Present Danger, The Rock, Under Siege, and of course Breaking Bad. The introduction of Christopher Lee is very quirky and weird, which is perfect for this actor. He plays Dr. Cushing Catheter. A funny note in the book is that his hero is Dr. Moreau. as in the island of Dr. Moreau. This mad scientist has so many oddities, starting with a brain in a jar that belongs to W.H. Donovan from the 1942 classic horror novel Donovan's Brain. When Dr. Catheter hands off the specimen from his secretary, it is given to the film's writer, Charlie Haas. The elephant you see passing the screen was originally going to be part of an idea to make an elephant gremlin, but the idea was dropped. Now, there was a deleted scene where Dr. Catheter inspects a bat and muses about blood-sucking because Lee is famous for playing a vampire in his Hammer horror days.
I'm told they sometimes feed on blood.
Oh, that's a different kind of bat, Doctor. South American.
Oh. Well, keep up the good work, Wallace.
I'll be honest and say that Martin and Lewis are better in Terminator 2, but as Gizmo dances, the song was supposed to be Billy Idol's Dancing with Myself. The studio told Dante they had the rights to the song, and they filmed it with the dancing timed to that song. Before the film came out, the studio backpedaled and said they didn't have the rights. So, the filmmakers needed to find a song that matched the movements Gizmo made. The closest they got was Fats Domino, I'm Ready. Billy's lights turning off was something we didn't see in 1990. Today, many businesses have motion-controlled lights, which is one of the many things this movie predicted perfectly. This will lead us into our next video where Billy will save Gizmo and the havoc will begin. Until then, just follow the Clamp Center's advice.
And have a powerful day.
If you like what you see here, click like and subscribe. Use super thanks. It helps.